All right. Hello, everyone. Oh, not sure. There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 5th general meeting. We are very happy everyone to join us today. Here we go. Some reminders. Well, happy Thanksgiving, first of all. I hope you guys have a safe and happy break this week and get some rest before midterms or finals. And then just to look ahead, next week we have our 4 p.m. meeting with Dr. Bronstein, who's the director of the Movement Disorders Clinic at UCLA. So that will be a great opportunity for you guys to network, get to know about his profession, and ask him any questions. And then our last meeting of the quarter will be December 8th. That will be kind of a club recap, and we'll do a fun social at the end. And yeah, so something to look forward to. And now I'm going to turn it over to research. They're going to be leading a journal club for us today. Here we go.
Hey everyone, how are y'all doing? So today we're going to be doing a journal club type meeting today, and we're going to be going over the paper that we put in the general chat. So I'll be sharing the paper unless Ellen or Sebastian, you guys want to share anything as well. So just let me know if that's something you guys want to do. But I'll be sharing the paper, and then Ellen will start us off with the introduction.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm just going to really quickly introduce the paper and just serve as a reminder of what you guys might have read. So for this week's journal club, we will be having a discussion about Dr. Bronstein's paper entitled The Association Between Lifestyle Factors and Parkinson's Disease Progression and Mortality. So essentially, this study examines how lifestyle factors such as caffeine or alcohol consumption, physical activity, or smoking can affect Parkinson's progression and patient survival. It's important for us to discuss this paper because, as we've learned in weeks in the past, current treatments cannot reverse the disease. So it's important for us to understand the impact of lifestyle factors in potentially preventing motor progression or cognitive decline in Parkinson's patients. Yeah, so now I'll be passing on to Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks. So just for some context of the paper, I guess, in the paper, they use what's called the Hone and Yar scale to measure the progression of motor dysfunction in the patients. And so I'm just going to be talking about just in general what that really means, just so you can understand that a little better. So the Hone and Yar scale is a 5-stage system for describing how the symptoms of Parkinson's progress. And so the first stage is minimal or no functional impairment in the arms or legs, and that's on one side of the body. And then the second stage is when that's on both sides of the body, so bilateral. And then the third stage, which is the one that that the research group mainly focused on, is when there's a loss of balance within the patient. And then we also have the fourth stage in which the patient cannot stand or walk unassisted. And then the fifth and final stage is when the patient is confined to a bed or wheelchair unless aided.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellen and Sebastian. So we will be going into 7 breakout rooms. And so I will let you guys all share what the 7 breakout rooms look like. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to split off people into each category of the journal. And so as you can see here, we have 7 groups. And so one group is going to talk about the abstract, one group will talk about, 2 groups talk about methods, and then the results and figures and discussion. And so you all will have 5 to 7 minutes to do that. And then when we come back, we're going to have each group just give a little intro, talk about what they thought was important about each section, and just anything that they want to talk about that really jumped out at them. And then we will finish with a larger group discussion about the paper as a whole. So now we'll just roll up into breakout rooms.
Okay, should I assign randomly or let them choose?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, you should have gotten an invitation.
And we're still waiting for a couple people to get in. But I will just share my screen again on like questions that we want you guys to focus on, or like questions if you need like a little bit of help on how to focus what you talked about in your discussions. But if the abstract intro group is present, can you guys just kind of go over what you talked about and maybe address some of the questions that we have here?
Sure. So for our group, what we talked about, we actually talked about the first question. So the specific aims of the study were to determine what factors would impact the progression of Parkinson's. So unlike previous studies, which had mainly looked at the onset of the disease, this was more looking at like motor progression, like cognitive decline after a person had already been diagnosed. And this was like within 3 years after. Does someone else want to go for the next question from my group?
Yeah, so the factors they were looking at were alcohol consumption, caffeine consumption, physical activity, participation in competitive sports, and head injuries within that. And smoking were the main factors they were looking at. And it was the kind of the presence of the 4 main stages of their life prior to their diagnosis, starting at age 18.
And does anyone want to comment on things that you thought were surprising or interesting? And this goes for the abstract group as well as anybody else.
I thought it was really interesting that they noted that people that had never drank had an increased risk that was similar to an increased risk in the people that were heavy drinkers versus the lower risk of people that were only moderate drinkers.
Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of reminds me of that little, like, when people like red wine, like a little bit of it is good for like heart, like healthiness or whatever. So it's like, you know, making sure you're in the moderation zone as opposed to none or too much was interesting as well. Does anyone else find anything that they thought was surprising about the paper? Okay, moving on to the methods section. So subjects and lifestyle factors. Do you guys have anything that you noted that was interesting?
Or just like anything interesting?
Yeah.
Or just like in general, the information?
Both. Whatever you think, whatever you talked about in your group, really.
All right. Parkinson's patients were enrolled. They had to be diagnosed within 3 years. It started at 473. After screening of actually having PD, it was 360, and over time with further examinations in a longitudinal manner, only 245 people were left, and 341 people for control. These people came from 3 central California counties.
And do you guys think that the paper was clear in their methods of selection, or were there any things that could be improved?
Yeah, we talked about possibly having a larger sample size to more accurately encompass PD patients. So for example, the only patients that were chosen for the study was people in 3 counties in California. So people from probably Northern or Southern California or even different states could have been chosen.
Yeah, great points. Does anyone from that group have anything else that jumped out at them?
I think the importance, we talked about how it's important to get people from different areas because people could have different lifestyles, and that's the whole study.
Right. Yeah, good point there. Thank you, methods group. We'll go on to our second methods group, so clinical outcomes and statistical analysis. So what did you guys talk about, or like any answers to these questions that we have here?
In general, for like the first question about telephone interviews, one of the biggest things that we talked about was that telephone interviews provide you a lot easier access to patients. So it's easier to contact them, to kind of check in on them and see how they're doing. The problem with that is that the feedback you're getting could be inconsistent since everybody's giving relatively subjective opinions, and you're basing your data based on what they're telling you instead of saying like a doctor's or your researcher's objective opinion, which can be standardized.
And does anyone want to talk about what tests were used to analyze disease progression?
Yeah, so basically the the test that they used was the mini mental state exam, or the MMSE. And then they would then rank them on the Hohen and Yaher, or H and Y scale, which is a 1 to 5 scale, to like determine like how much they've improved versus how much they've like deteriorated over the different checkups that they did.
And this is for anyone, but do you think that those two methods of testing were good enough, or do you believe that it would be good to have another set of testing for just analysis of disease progression? Okay, so we're good with 2. That's great. Does anyone want to talk about if it would be good to have just having like a standardized sheet, basically asking all the questions as compared to a telephone interview, and just talk about the differences in bias between telephone and just a survey?
I think like one of the biggest biases with like phone surveys is that you often have the like chance of someone not picking up the phone, and then you're like missing out on certain people because of that. And that could like lead to biases in the data. So doing phone interviews can be bad for that reason. But then with the survey, it's like you're only going to get certain people in an area, or you're going to, if it's like an in-person survey, you can't really like go out and talk to multiple people from like across the like state or like throughout multiple counties. And if it's online, you're gonna like leave out those who are like who can't afford to like go online or have computers, or those who are maybe elderly and don't know how to access or work computers. So there's a lot of like different groups you may be leaving out with each of these things.
Awesome. Yeah, great points, you guys. Now we're going to move on to the results and figures, group A. So just what did you guys talk about? What figures did you focus on, and what did you find interesting?
Yeah, so we talked about a lot of the different things. One thing was on alcohol. People who drank it moderately were at a less risk to those who didn't drink it at all, and those who drank it above the median, which was interesting because most people would think if you didn't drink it at all, you would be at the lowest risk, but that wasn't the case. Another thing was that caffeine, if you drink caffeine before your diagnosis versus after your diagnosis, they have different rates. If anyone else wants to add from this group.
Yeah, we were looking at the first figure, and then we were pretty surprised at the non-response and also the amount of people who died. So we were wondering if there's like survival bias or any other kind of other factor.
Yeah, another, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, and I was going to add on, do you have a follow-up question, friend?
I just wanted to make sure you said survival bias was a part of what you guys talked about.
Yeah, survival bias.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like with that, I think someone mentioned previously from another group, the sample size is relatively small, and we had, I think, 17 people withdrew and 21 people couldn't be reached after for the follow-up. I think it was within 3 years. So definitely increasing the sample size could help.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely think that's interesting as well because people can move and they only looked at like 3 counties. So it is interesting that they have to kind of work to get that information that they lost as well. So yeah, great point, you guys. What about the second results and figures group? What figures did you guys talk about, and was anything you found surprising?
Yeah, I guess for our group, we kind of had similar, like interesting and surprising findings as Group A. So again, with the moderation of alcohol being protective, then also with caffeine being, use of caffeine also being protective against disease progression. And then in terms of like what we were looking at for sports and physical activity, we found that people with a history of competitive sports or lifelong activity were had a high protection against progression as tested in the test. I mean, then of course, as expected, smoking led to increased risk of developing Parkinson's progression.
Thank you, Sebastian, for speaking on that. And this is for all the results groups, but do you guys believe that the figures and tables were presented clearly, and would you improve anything about the results and figures section? Okay, sounds good. It looks like all the results and figures are clear, so that's really good about the study. And it looks like everyone talked about every single part, so that's good too. So now we're going to focus on discussion group A, and this one's just going to be a bit more broad, but a potential question you guys could answer is just, do you guys have any future ideas for research, as well as what were things in discussion that jumped out at you?
I know in our group, wait, okay, sorry about that. So I know in our group we talked about, well, like we just know that the evidence does support that lifestyle factors may modify symptom progression. But one thing that we noted that we were concerned about was that since they looked at all these factors at once, it's kind of hard to discern like exactly like one association. Like I think it mentioned that like the people who noted that they drank, like they never drank, they also were the same people that noted that they drank like very little caffeine, didn't participate in sports. So it's really kind of hard to, I guess, kind of weed out the true cause of maybe like the protection against the symptoms. I don't know if anyone else wants to add.
I thought that was more speculative that they thought that the reason why the cohorts of people that didn't drink alcohol were less likely to drink caffeine and therefore would not have the neuroprotective mechanism present from the caffeine. I thought that was more speculative. I agree that it would be nice to parse these. But I mean, the fact of the matter is you'd have to put someone in a room and control every single thing that they do for a set amount of time in order to never have external influences of lifestyle factors. So I'm not sure we're going to see a study quite like that. But another lifestyle factor that I think has a huge component is sleep. And I would like to see more data on sleep and the progression of Parkinson's with that. So.
Yeah, they also mentioned the like protective effects of caffeine. And I thought it would be really interesting to see a similar study on animals with alcohol instead of caffeine to be able to look at the like neurological effects of it.
Yeah, going off of that, does anyone have any ideas of animal models that they would use to maybe parse out disease progression and how they would do that in a lab? Well, I think like one idea that we could be looking at in the future is potentially working with transgenic mice with Parkinson's related genes. Obviously, like we don't know specifically which genes are related to Parkinson's, but working with the ones that have the most correlation, and then maybe giving them certain levels of caffeine or certain levels of alcohol could help us to determine if one or the other has a greater association with disease progression. So it might be helpful to work on animal models, whether it be mice or monkeys or things like that. But yeah, great points from everyone from discussion A. For discussion group B, just talk about what you guys talked about in your group and maybe some ways of presenting the information from this paper to patients with Parkinson's.
So we talked about kind of like future research as well, but we kind of focused on like the idea of global health and like obviously like different cultures, there's different rates of like alcohol and caffeine consumption. So studying how like the culture affects like the effect of the results. So like if two cultures drink the same amount of caffeine, like are we still going to see the same amount of the same results in both groups? And in terms of like the effective ways of presenting the information, I think it's really important to, like when you're just talking to a patient, like being aware of like talk in terms of like talking to them, like hold on, let me think of what I'm going to say. Like knowing how to properly talk to them. So obviously they may have trouble with communication. So being aware of that, maybe having like a speech pathologist in the room with you. So that way you're able to have that sense of communication. And again, that empathy. And in terms of like presenting the information specifically from this paper, I think definitely getting to know that patient and figuring out an effective way of finding like if they consume alcohol or coffee consumption, how often they exercise. And I think it's really important to emphasize the idea of like an effective method of finding out which lifestyle factors that they have in their own life, because obviously something like a survey wouldn't be as beneficial because we've seen like obviously there's a lot of bias in things like surveys and even like telephone interviews.
Great points. Thanks, Neha. Does anyone else from that group have anything to say? Okay, looks like Neha was able to answer all those questions from your group. And so now we're just going to move into discussion questions that are for everyone. So just going off of the paper as a whole, what were some initial impressions that you guys had of the paper, reading through it and just skimming through it?
I think one of my initial impressions was just how strongly it seemed like caffeine seemed to have a beneficial impact, and how I feel like we've heard about red wine in the past, like for heart health and like in moderate amounts. But I feel like caffeine so frequently, it's like, oh, we drink too much of it. Like we shouldn't, it's better not to drink caffeine. But it's interesting to see something where caffeine is being seen as being beneficial, because I feel like that's just not something that's talked about very much. And it'd be interesting to see that studied more to see if it's can be helpful in other neurodegenerative disorders or even in any other fields of medicine.
Just to kind of ping pong off that, I actually did a lot of research on caffeine, and there's a lot of stuff out there for its use in treating a lot of different disease states, but also just cognitive decline in general. It's used a lot in ketogenic research because it liberates free fatty acids from adipose tissue. So you can use it as a signaling molecule as well. And then not just caffeine, you can also use caffeine agonist precursor molecules or molecules that are shaped similarly. L-theanine you can use like in green tea. And then also there's one in dark chocolate, which we know. So I've seen some research on that come out. about like brewing tea from dark chocolate and stuff like that. So it's got a kind of robust, to use a coffee pun, a kind of robust amount of research out there, which is neat. But you're right, people don't talk about it, but it is definitely being studied, and I think that it's starting to come up as being way more beneficial in terms of the health food industry and in terms of the supplement industry. They're selling a lot of supplements with like green tea extract in it and L-theanine and stuff like that. So you can find those in just about any nootropic stack or any kind of cognitive performance enhancing supplements out there. Found that pretty interesting.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Clara. Does anyone else have any initial impressions of the paper that they would like to share? Okay, so now we'll go to the next question. So what were some of the limitations of the paper, and what would you do to improve the paper, whether that be the methodology or the structure of the paper?
Well, to me, like one of the biggest things about the methodology was that they were taking patients with the disease and then they were asking them to recall everything that they've done. And then like often like when we're remembering things, we can often like over exaggerate or under exaggerate what we've done. So like maybe if a patient was like drinking 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day, but they like overthink, they over exaggerate and they say they have 3 and 4. So you can't really like trust what the patient, like what the people you're experimenting on are telling you. So I feel like it would have been better if maybe like they followed them. I know that like logistically that's not possible. Like if they followed them and had them track it and then see if they develop Parkinson's, I feel like that would have been a better methodology.
Right, so making it a bit more longitudinal and maybe focusing on individuals that have familial Parkinson's, so you can see if their lifestyles affect they're potentially getting the disease, and then obviously a disease progression from there for.
Yeah.
And does anyone else have any limitations that they saw from the paper?
I think we mentioned this before, but it's like the same thing as before, where it's like if you just get patients from this one area, then you don't get a variety of lifestyles necessarily. Some places have a more sedentary lifestyle and all that, so.
Anyone else? Any improvements that you would make?
I think like instead of asking the patients to recall like how many coffees they had within the week, we can provide them like a chart or table so they can put down like exact numbers, and then we are going to like put that turn that data into a table for analysis. I mean, that'll be like more standardized.
Yeah, that makes sense too, because it's like we also kind of know, as opposed to like a telephone interview where it could go either way and it's part of a conversation, could be fudged in a sense because people are like talking and maybe changing their answers. And so now we're just going to talk about like the structure of the paper. So did you guys like how the paper was laid out? Would you make any changes to it? And how would you maybe structure it if you had the chance to?
I thought structure-wise, this paper followed pretty much a standard research paper structure. It was pretty normal, and because of that, like you see the intro, you see the abstract and the intro first, and then methodology, and then the resultant discussion. It's a very logical flow to everything that's being presented. Yeah, I think in general, I don't remember how much they went into depth about like future steps. And they probably did somewhat in their discussion section, but I think one of the biggest things that they emphasized was that they needed this to be replicated. So I think, that was something that stood out to me, and I have to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt, because they mentioned that these results are like a one-off, and like until they're replicated, they're not like set in stone. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for mentioning the replication part as well, Alex. That's really important. And to go on to our next question, are there any variables or lifestyle factors that you would also want to add to the list and maybe do research on?
I think that's a good question, but I feel like it's hard to think of one just on the spot.
Sleep.
Yeah, I think sleep could be really interesting. Or, yeah, like someone just put in the chat, like stress and maybe like what, like more of like, because they did look a little bit, I think, into like occupation, but maybe like some more deeply into occupational things or like where they live growing up. Like, because I know there's definitely not like equity in terms of like chemical pollution or like kind of the health like and hazard levels in various neighborhoods. And so like maybe some of those influences growing up, because I know they have been proven like to impact cancer and other things like that. So I don't know if that would contribute in Parkinson's.
Yeah, those are great points. Anyone else? Anything that they would personally think would be interesting in learning about?
I wonder if people with Parkinson's that have caregivers and a support system and people to help them end up having a significant impact on disease progression.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard that with like other diseases not related to Parkinson's, so that'd be interesting to see if like support systems would help.
I was thinking maybe something interesting would also be maybe like type of diet, like whether it's like a vegetarian or non-vegetarian diet, and whether that could impact like maybe possibly like the kind of nutrients that would be involved. But yeah, I'm not really sure like how that would work, but something along those lines.
No, yeah, that's a good point, Sasha. I think it's interesting to see what diets have an effect because there's that gut brain connection. So if there's like something going on in that microbiome in your stomach that could be affecting potential maybe like potential causes or potential disease progression, would be interesting to see. And also like changes in diet may be interesting if someone like grew up vegetarian and then stopped being vegetarian. That might be something that we could also look at as well.
Yeah, for sure.
No, great points from everyone. Does anyone else, just to finish up basically, but does anyone else have any suggestions for future research or just any things that popped out to them that they would want to kind of mention before we end our little journal club? Oh yeah, as Tiffany said, any questions for the researchers? We're gonna have Dr. Bronstein in next week, so this could be your time to like brainstorm a question that you would ask him about why he chose this paper and why he chose these methodologies. Yeah, and it's all right if you don't have questions right now, but we'll let you marinate on the paper and then we'll send out a little survey form for you to ask questions to Dr. Bronstein. He's super cool. So I'm really glad we have the opportunity to speak with him next week. And I think this concludes our first journal club for hand. So, thank you Education and RT for being a great moderator. If you guys don't have anything else to add, I think this concludes our general meeting number 5. So thank you everyone for turning on your cameras. I hope you have a safe and healthy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday.
Take care, everyone. Be safe and have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
you.
Day.